move, but they are. But it is Sunday, and in the dog days of summer, it is hot out here. So get inside and get into a rotation because we have one going on. Jump on in. Now,
Hey,
now, one of the legislators I talk to every once in a while says words matter. And we're going to discuss the power of words, especially when it comes to cannabis, in this special great edition of the rotation where we got one guy who's not here right now because he has some very pressing things to handle. And I'm on the road right now in Yeehaw Junction, one of the great historical places in Florida. And Carlos is in the studio. So let us introduce ourselves. My name is Gary Stein. I'm the political director of Suncoast Normal and the master of public health. And up above me, to your left, my right, I think, is Carlos Armida. Go ahead and put the little applause in there.
yeah, thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, our deputy director and master of business administration, because he knows his business.
I mean,
And
business, baby.
and not here right now is our executive director, Chris Kano, and our master of public administration.
Yeah, I'll just
And
do the horns. Don't
marketing.
worry, Kano is okay. He's just a little under the weather, and
No, he's over the weather. The weather is just kind of streaming beneath him.
he's got
We're,
some stomach issues going on this morning.
yeah, he's eating that he's eating that raw calamari again. We're going to discuss that later on too. But I have my oldest daughter got her master's degree here in marketing over University of Central Florida and also University of Akron. And she had a favorite professor. Everybody has one favorite professor who always says that marketing is about bullshitting folks on a grand scale. And it's all about manipulating the words that we use to make people buy things. And buying could mean anything, as in buying with cash or buying into a philosophy. And that's why words are so important. And that's one of the reasons we have a special guest today from the great state of, where are you? You're Seattle, right?
I'm in Seattle, Washington.
Seattle, Washington, where the skies are blue as green, and it always rains, whether it's raining or not. And he is a master of marketing and words, and has gone very heavily into topics that I feel a lot about. And one of the things that I deal with right now is the fact that I've always hated the word recreational, in part because of the fact that they use it to discuss heroin use and opium use when it's not for medical use. Of course, there's not much medical use for heroin anymore. There was at one point in time. But Carlos, you have that one video I did a couple years ago?
All right, I'm going to put you on mute so people can hear the video. But
This is Gary Stein from Clarity Pack, and I'm wearing my non-medical shirt here today. I call it my non-medical shirt because I'm not a doctor. My degree is a Master's of Public Health. But this is paralleling the whole concept of legalization of cannabis, because back in the 90s we got medical cannabis legalized, and when it came time to try moving forward, rather than using the word non-medical, somebody came up with the idea of using the word recreational. But the problem with that is it really doesn't work. In fact, it works exactly the opposite, because the opposite of the word recreational is professional. It just doesn't work. I mean, recreational is softball, basketball, rock climbing, squirrel throwing. Whatever you like to use for recreational is fine, but using cannabis is not really a recreation. It's more of a relaxing, de-stressing, socializing kind of thing, but it's not a recreation. And the other thing is that, again, the whole concept of using the word recreational was actually a way of slowing down the legalization movement. Let me explain. Because of the fact that the opposite of the word recreational is professional, that means in people's minds, the more recreational you are, the less professional you are. Therefore, the more recreational you are, the less productive you are. The more likely you are to be a stoner, a person who's lying on the beach as opposed to being at work. What do you think about this? When people say this, that is why they're using it against us. So we need to stop using the word recreational. Here's the word you need to use: responsible adult use. Those are the words that make far more sense, because we are responsible, and we're talking about adult use. We're talking about the use over the age of 21. We're not talking about recreational, because we're not talking about passing out joints on a playground. We're talking about responsible adult use. And these are the words you'll hear in the candidates moving on. These are the words that candidate Mayor Andrew Gillum is using now. So remember, responsible adult use. This is brought to you by Clarity PAC. We are the people that are going to make this happen, this particular election. So go to claritypac.net, .org, or .com and donate so we can make this happen this election. Remember, responsible adult use, claritypac.com.
Yes,
So
right now.
curious. All
All
right.
right.
All
Can
right.
you hear me now?
I unmuted you, Gary. What's up?
All right. Well, there you go. So now you know where I stand. And now we get a chance to talk to our guest, Dave Paleschuck, from all the way in Seattle, who has written at least one book that I know of, and several others coming up, about the use of words and the use of marketing and the use of branding. And we'd love to hear how this basically, Dave, where did you go from working for corporations like Pepsi and things of that sort to getting into cannabis and then getting into the topics you're currently working on right now?
Well, it's funny. You spoke about marketing earlier, and some of your daughter's thoughts on that. I'll start off with marketing. For me, marketing has been my career, marketing and branding. I have spent, as you mentioned a minute ago, I've spent almost 20 years at American Express, MasterCard, Pepsi, and Microsoft in marketing and branding, but have always been a consumer of cannabis. And so, that said, working in corporate, I felt I was leading two lives, if you will. And so in 2012, when the I-502 law passed in Washington State, and many of my friends left Microsoft, Starbucks, Boeing, Amazon to get to the cannabis industry, I thought it might be my time as well to be my true self and to offer my services and my skills to the industry. So with that, I left Microsoft and I went to go work at Dope Magazine for 4 years. After Dope Magazine, I then went to go work for Evergreen Herbal, the largest processor, depending on the month, in the state, where I created many of the selling brands. And then took those brands out to other states. I'm also a certified licensing specialist, so I helped basically license those brands into other legal states, and even took them over to Europe and to South America as well. So for me, it's been a natural progression in terms of developing products for consumers, and seeking out those needs of those consumers. I beg to differ, in terms of how you couched or contextualized marketing.
I do too.
Shitty marketers try to sell crap to people without knowing about their concerns or what they're about. Good marketers actually start off with the consumer first. They figure out what the consumer's needs are, what their need states are, what their consumption rituals are, etc. And they create brands and create messaging to those people that, quite frankly, shouldn't be a sale if they do it right. Those people and those consumers should say, wow, this is directed at me. This is speaking my language. This is what I want. This is what I need. And if it's a quality product and does what it says it will do, then basically it's doing what it should do and what the consumers want and desire. So I always take the stance that start with the consumer first, figure out what it is they want, and then solve that problem. So moving forward, having worked at Dope Magazine, having worked at Evergreen Herbal, and having worked at a number of other companies in the industry and served them, and now as a consultant, my company Branding Bud Consulting Group consults to many cannabis companies in the country and around the world. So, having said that, what I ended up doing after my stint at all these companies before starting my own company is I wrote a book called Branding Bud: The Commercialization of Cannabis. To my surprise, that book, well, I should say it was the first and only book specifically on cannabis branding. And to my surprise, it actually for 9 months was the best-selling book on Amazon in 2 categories, which is branding and logo design and green business. So, I've taken the time to really think about cannabis, to think about it in a professional way. I've created in the book, I talk about the 14 cannabis brand archetypes, which again are looking at brands that exist and seeing how they appeal to consumers that are out there. And along the way, I've always seen, people. I think the one rub that's always sort of come across, people ask me if I use marijuana, and I always say no. I don't use marijuana. I consume cannabis, and to me, if somebody asks me, "Do you use marijuana?" it's often a sign that they don't fully understand the plant, or the industry, or people in general. But that's the long story of how I got into the industry and what I think about words and why I think words are so important, especially in the cannabis industry.
Words are super important, and I have to say that even though Gary's having all these like technical issues right now, I have to say I really like having an excuse to put him on mute. But David, I'm really excited to have you on the show today, and part of that reason is because I actually fancy myself a bit of a marketer as well. And I haven't wrote many books on the subject, and I definitely have not had such a prestigious career as yourself. So I hopefully can learn quite a bit and about this and how to market my own company a little bit better. Now, words are super, super important. And I definitely they're okay to explain something in addition to Chillum and marketing Chillum. Of course, I do normal. And one time I was doing some other activist push, and I was, really, I can't remember what it was, but I remember that we were at this stage where it's like, okay, how are we going to get people to hear about this, right? And I was coming up with all of these different things where like I was like, oh yeah, man, we could like sit outside the Capitol, man, and sit in a circle and I was with somebody who like kind of like took a bunch of papers he had in his hand, and he like kind of bopped me for a second. And he told me, he's like, dude, stop thinking like an activist, start thinking like a marketer. And it was at that point that I realized that activism was so really, activism is kind of a form of marketing. You're kind of trying to educate people about something, you know what I mean? And like with cannabis, I feel like marketing in the cannabis industry can be a bit of an activism push, so it is really important for these brands, and I might be rambling a little bit, but it's really important for these brands to really represent the movement in a very important way. That being said, I'm also a little laissez-faire about how I market myself and my company a little bit. I think it's really important to like give like almost like a relaxed look, and not take yourself too seriously. So like the words you use are super important in this case, right? You said something about marijuana before, but like what other words would you not use in order to like promote cannabis? There's a lot of words here.
There are, and
Yeah.
before we get before we even jump into the words, I think the first thing that's most important is who are we speaking to, right? So as an activist, you're speaking to a couple of different people, right? As an activist, you're speaking to the community that you're acting on behalf of. So in that case, using the word or terms weed or other terms, that's fine, and I think that works there. But as soon as you're talking to a politician or you're up on Capitol Hill making your claim, you know, you don't want to look like a stoner. You don't want to use words. You don't want to use the term weed or marijuana for that matter, because remember, it's Capitol Hill that that started the negativity around marijuana. So, and the history still exists there. So if you're with your friends and you're with a close community, in this case the cannabis community, absolutely use the words you feel most comfortable with. But when you're in your circle, so to speak, and even that, I picture when you said that, people passing a joint in front of some, city hall or in front of Capitol Hill or on Capitol Hill. You know what? Everyone, all the politicians look out and say, look at those stoners out on the street. I'd even say further, all the 420 events where people roll these 4 foot long joints. I mean, all
It's funny you should mention that, because part of one thing that this organization actually did, and this organization's actually pretty proud of it, is that we took a 6-foot giant blunt and we put it on a parade float, and we purposely put it on a parade that was in the most conservative part of town on the most conservative holiday, July 4th. And it was a family parade. So it was in front of children and everything. And I mean, it got into the news. And we can argue back and forth of we're normalizing things, man, and whatnot. But it is where we got like the most flack, because because we were showing this thing in front of children.
To me, I mean, no offense, it's I'll say this: I have a number of gay friends, and I always ask them, why on Gay Pride Day, do all the guys put on pink thongs and walk in a parade? And my one friend in particular who did that, he said, because we're showing our true self. And I said, but you're missing the point. The opportunity is to create an environment that normal people, if you will, or not from the community, look at you and say, oh, look at all these guys in pink thongs. Whereas if maybe you wore what you wore to work every day, or if you wore what you did every day, people would say, wow, they're just like me. There's not too much of a difference. And so, the 4-foot joint, passing around is, I'm telling you, they're looking out the window saying, look at those stoners. Whereas if people showed up and they looked like your sister, your brother, your mother, your father, your son or daughter, people would say, wow, they're not stoners, in quotes. They're actually normal people that consume cannabis. And, for years, I used to be a professional skateboarder a long time ago. And I hated it when people called me a skater. Why? Because a skater is one single term to define me. And there's so many aspects of me that, and some of them, many of them, most of them have nothing to do with skateboarding. So to take one activity that I do and to label me as such means that you've alienated me, you've pegged me, you've labeled me, and it's so much easier for people to basically just put you on the side for doing that. So I think as humans, we need to show our human side. I think as cannabis consumers, it's really important to show that, hey, we're just like you. We just smoke weed or consume cannabis. And that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. But I think we come back to that initial conversation or the initial thought of what is marketing. Marketing is speaking the language of the people you're trying to appeal to. How do we do that? We look at them, whether they're consumers, whether they're politicians, etc., and we approach them and use the words that they want to hear, not the words that we use within our
Well,
small community.
that's where we get into kind of an issue here, because you talk about the Pride Parade, and honestly, you talk about the giant joint, the giant blunt, and like the Pride Parade. It's there's two demographics here, and they're absolutely at odds. You know what I mean? And you ask who you're appealing to, and the thing is that a pride parade is not to appeal to these politicians. It's to appeal to the LGBTQ plus community. And that's why they don't button up, and that's why they don't and that's why when these gay activists go to Capitol or something like that, they're not wearing their thongs, then they're not wearing their pride flags, and they're in a suit. And that's why when I go up to the Capitol, I'm wearing a suit. And that's why when I'm at a formal event, I tend to dress up a little bit more. But there's two communities that are completely at odds, and I think it's very important to consider the fact that one side hates the other. You know what I mean? And it's hard to really appeal to that demographic. And like, I think really one of the best things that we can do as a culture, as a cannabis culture, is to own up to these things and say, yeah, I'm a pothead that smokes weed, but I'm also a doctor, and that goes into what you're saying about being a skater. I'm also an entrepreneur. I'm also an activist. I'm also a philanthropist. I also do all these great things in the community. And if you engage in conversation with me, you'll find that I'm also a good guy, and I have ethics, and I actually can speak somewhat intellectually. And I think it's important that we brand these terms. We brand these terms, pothead, weed, as positive things, that we get rid of these stigmas. And I really think that's what activism is in the end, is informing people that potheads aren't bad people, and that they should have all the rights to consume their medicine and consume whatever recreational or adult use to in the way that they want, because they're not hurting anybody.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, right? I don't disagree with you. I think I think
It goes before you continue. It just goes into the idea that activism is hard work. You know what I mean? It's more difficult than actual marketing. It's a little bit more involved, because like you're not picking that demographic. You're as a matter of a demographic to appeal to. You're picking a demographic that hates what you're trying to put forward, right? And is misinformed about what you're trying to put forward. And then you just need to educate them. I don't know. How do you feel about my stance?
well, I'll start off by saying hate is a very strong word, but I think you followed up with the word misinformed. And I think if people are given the right information, and as a marketer, I'll say fed the right information, um, that helps. And I also understand what you're saying, for example, about, glorifying the term pothead or stoner. I mean, it's very much like the N word, where, the community has taken it over.
I wouldn't go that far, but
Well, I don't mean it.
I see what you're saying. It's a way to label and derogotize this specific group.
Right, and yes, and just to be really clear, to clarify, I'm only talking about taking a word that was used against a community and now owning that word and turning it into something different and being used within the community. So it's definitely different. It's not a one-to-one analogy for sure, and I don't want to come across as
Of course.
But what's similar is is really the ownership of a word by a community and taking it over, and using it at least with the N-word within the community. But in this case, what you're saying is to really, propagate that word, stoner, pothead, what have you. But my thought is, like I said, while I don't disagree with you, I think that's, taking the hardest path possible. I think the easier way is, again, understanding first who you are. Once you're
Geez, I keep on trying to get Gary in here, but it just does not work out. I'm sorry about that.
No, that's cool. So I think understanding who you're talking to and informing them in a way that they understand, using words. I'll use this analogy. Everybody always talks about how French people are so rude when they ask for directions when they're in Paris. That's the ugly American, right? If people understood they're speaking a different language, and if people walked up to them and said in French, "Excuse me, I don't speak your language, but I'm trying to find this, these directions," or if they start off with a little bit of French, then the people know that they're at least trying to communicate to them in their language, in their home country. I think it's very much the same thing. We need to stop speaking our language, or not. We don't need to stop speaking our language. We need to understand the language of other people that we're trying to convince and find that bridge so they respect us instead of, in your words, hate us. Right? At least they say, "Hey, wait a second. Carlos is an entrepreneur. Carlos has an MBA. Carlos, is an activist. Carlos has ethics. Carlos cares about people." And then you gain that credibility, and therefore they're more not only willing but able to listen to you and listen to your message. As soon as you say whatever, "I'm a pothead," they're like, "Oh, you're not the person I want to speak to." And so, while calling yourself a pothead within the community might be fine, I think, walking up the steps to Capitol Hill saying, "Hey, the pothead's here," is a perfect way to alienate yourself. And I think that's what a lot of cannabis activists do, quite frankly.
I can understand that. I'm reminded of like this situation with my parents, where my parents have always been, dude, my parents have always been on my ass to pull my pants up, and to shave my beard. And no, I was just, but I mean, they honestly, they've always been big on like, how do you present yourself? How do you present yourself to society? And I remember like just going through like just hell with them about it in high school. And at the end of high school, we go to church one Sunday, and then after church, they're like, "Oh, we want to go to our friend's house, for church lunch." And we show up, and the guy's, wearing sandals, he's in shorts, his hair's long, his beard isn't trimmed, he's talking shit, he's cursing, he's bullshitting, he's making fun of my dad. He's, what I mean? Like, and uh my parents, and I remember like thinking about it, I'm like, oh man, this is bullshit, because like this guy is like, this guy's everything I want to be. And and I remember like my parents referring to him as like, he's not a bad guy, he's just like really down to earth, right? And the fact is, the guy is this rich, company owner, who is a leader in their industry. And it's very quickly I realized that when you're the best, you can kind of do whatever you want. You know what I mean? And it's this weird phenomena that I'm like trying to pin down. And like it reminds me, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with popular music today, but it reminds me of a gentleman that does popular music today called Post Malone, who is like, he's known for smelling bad, and you know what I mean, and he never shaves, and he's always drugged up, but he's a good singer. So he gets contracts to sing songs for kids cartoons and things like that, and he's good at what he does, so he does whatever he wants. And it just, like, I guess I'm rambling again. I'm not normally the main guy here, but the whole thing that I'm trying to portray here is that how do you get across to these people that stigmatize you? You know what I mean? Like you can't go to Capitol Hill and say, "Hey, I'm a pothead." So what do? You say that you don't smoke pot. You don't or you know what I mean? You say that you're a cannabis consumer, and then that I feel that kind of draws a line between you and the rest of the community in many ways. You know what I mean? Because there is this community, this adult use, recreational community that has these pop-up markets, and there's a whole culture there, and there's this whole music and writing, and there's a whole culture behind what is a pothead. And it feels like if you push that aside by saying, "Oh, I'm not a pothead, I'm a cannabis consumer, don't lump me in with all these stupid people," it ends up that you get systems like we have here in Florida where you can't grow at home or you can't open a business, and it's this corporate culture, this corporate monopoly that forms, and it just feeds into like this big corporate cannabis thing that pushes the actual cannabis community aside.
Yeah, I could appreciate what you're saying. And just to make it clear, just because I have a corporate background, does not mean I'm a corporate cannabis person at all. I totally believe, in the smaller single state operators. I totally believe in the mom and pop shops. I, for one, love the tomato analogy, which is you could buy tomatoes in the store at Whole Foods, super expensive heirloom tomatoes. You can go to the bodega and buy lesser quality or probably as good quality, but certainly cheaper tomatoes. And you could also grow tomatoes in your backyard, in your own garden, and share them with your neighbors, right?
Yeah,
So to me, I just want to make it clear, I'm not a supporter of big MSOs because,
and I'm not trying to say that,
right.
but yeah.
And so just coming back to what you said a moment ago, and as I did say earlier, when I'm with the community, in the community, at a community event, I'm part of the community, but when I'm talking to politicians or to other business people, then I speak their language. So really, I mean, in some ways, I'm somewhat chameleon-like. When I'm with the group I'm speaking to, or when I'm with a group that I'm either speaking to or part of, I use their language. I used a totally different language when I was skateboarding with my friends around the pool skating. So, but just going back to also something you said earlier, which is success, right? Success breeds success. So if someone is successful in something, so the churchgoer that you went to their house for after church lunch or after service lunch, or Post Malone, the fact that both of those people are successful, even though they consume, says, oh, wait a second. And actually, it breaks the stereotype of stoner and pothead. What do stoners and potheads do? Well, they're totally lazy, of course, right? And all these other things that are layered into those words. So the fact that someone is a successful businessman or an entrepreneur or businesswoman or an entrepreneur, shows that they're not stoners or not potheads. And so, actions speak louder than words, success speaks louder than words. And so there are certain, things there that again, show people that this particular person who's successful, isn't a stoner, even though they might consume. And I think that's the things we need to show. We need to show people, and that's really why I came into the industry, really want to be my true self, but also to say, like, wait a second, I've got a 20-year career at all these different companies I threw out earlier. I've got an MBA. I'm articulate. I'm caring. I'm responsible. All of those types of things. And I think people see, like, wow, okay, there are people like me or like us that consume the plant that aren't all stoners or potheads or wear tie-dyed shirts or smoke 4-foot joints. Like
where is the line though? Like where is
it's
it?
a it's a
Is it
it's a
that
blurred
you
line.
wear,
It's
yeah,
a it's a
is it
blurred
that
line.
you wear tie-dye but you don't wear tie-dye in the boardroom? Is that the line there? Like, it's
Yes, yes. I mean, yes. I'll say it specifically. Yes. As soon as you walk into a boardroom with a tie-dyed shirt, unless you're Ben and Jerry's, but again, Ben can walk in with a tie-dyed shirt because of Ben's success.
because they're the best.
That's right.
Yeah.
So if you're not Ben, or if you're not Post Malone, or if you're not somebody that's well known, then yeah, you have to think twice about how you present yourself in front of a different community. Um, that's just the way it is,
So,
just like you put your Sunday best on when you go to church.
my camera is like acting up a little bit, but maybe I can get it to work here. Yeah, it's not working at all. Shit.
You look fine to me.
There we go.
Now you zoomed in.
I don't know why it's doing that. All right, so I'm trying to get my camera to look around, because currently I'm inside my store here, and yeah, it's just not working right. Either way, so in addition, yeah, now it's not even working at all. So in addition to what we do with Normal, I'm the owner of this company, Chillum, right? And what Chillum is, it's we're a mushroom and hemp dispensary in Ybor City. And in many ways, people walk into the store and we're a smoke shop that sells hemp and mushrooms. Um, and so I bring this up because I want to talk about how I market my company in order to make sure that I don't get lumped in with or try to break stigmas, I guess you would say. But like you look around the shop and everything's clean, everything's white walls, pictures hanging on the wall. There's no Nag Chamba incense burning in the background. You won't find crack pipes in my store. You won't even find things like kava or kratom. Like we're very specific and very what we do. We're advocates for both psychedelics and cannabis. it I'm representing, and I keep on pushing in this conversation for like the other side of things, like the shady side of things, I feel like, and I want to just portray that like a lot of what you're saying is absolutely important. Like there's something wrong when somebody walks into a store that's trying to push for cannabis rights and they see crack pipes, and there's something wrong when somebody walks into a store that's trying to advocate for the benefits of psychedelics as medicine, right? And you see people that are like dozing off because of their consume kratom, and nothing wrong with kratom, blah blah blah. People find a lot of benefits from it, but it's just not our bag, man. So it's very important to me that that because like I mean it's you look around the store and like it gets you always get compared to an Apple store. But how you represent your company is of the utmost importance, and we stand apart. Like I can't tell you how many head shops that say that we misrepresent the community because we do media and we do PR and things like that, and they're over there fucking operating a seedy place. So it's important for me and to represent to you and to our listeners that this is really important how you present yourself. I walk a fine line. I think it's I talk about how I represent my company, but then there's been times when like I've gone to give a presentation and I tell you, David, I've purposely gotten super high, like ridiculously wrecked high before my presentation. And I walk into the room and I crack some stupid jokes and and then it's time to give the presentation. And then all of a sudden I'm talking about engineering and I'm talking about, all these different, like I'm blowing people away with the info that they're getting in the presentation. There's this fine line that I like to walk, and it really is that what we mentioned before. You wear tie-dye, but not in the court, in in the boardroom. But it's how, as a marketer, right, and representing your business like that, we pin that down. But how can you go into the Capitol, right, and represent the rights of these people that wear tie-dye if you're not wearing it? You know what I mean? Like, how, like, there's like a disassociation there. And I'm wondering how, like what would be the best way? Like, are you saying that we should just rebrand pothead, or like
No,
like
no.
what would be the best way to represent that culture to the opposition?
Well, there's a couple of things that I'd like to throw out. So, one, let me pose this to you. You said you don't sell crack pipes, but to the average person walking down the street who knows nothing about cannabis, they might look at a glass pipe or a bong and think it's the same thing as a crack pipe, right? So I always talk about there's a core community. The core community.
There's a type of pipe that I carry called a chillum. As a matter of fact, the whole store is called Chillum. Yep. I guess that's why I called the store that. But there's a dispenser on my countertop that just like dispenses these cheap little things. And there are crackheads that come in here and try to use that. Like, even crackheads get confused.
Right. So I mean, let me throw it back to you. So why do you think that average Jane and average Joe wouldn't look through your window and think the same thing? That and not only that, but see crackheads literally, as per your description, walking in and out of your store. So it only fuels their fire.
I'm in Ybor City. There's a lot of crackheads out here.
Right, but what I'm saying is actually what you're what I'm now taking based on what you shared with me right now is, average Jane, average Joe walking down the street will look in and, see pipes. They don't know the difference. And even further, you just said you have crackheads coming in and out, thinking that they don't know the difference. So those are the types of things I'm talking about. That just fosters these stereotypes. But to go to the next thing that you just also mentioned is, how do you represent, the tie-dyed community, for lack of a better way of saying it, without wearing a tie-dyed shirt? Here's the truth. The truth is that tie-dyed wearers, which is such a stereotype, but they exist, is only a small segment of cannabis consumers. So for people to think that only people that smoke cannabis wear tie-dyed shirts and, have Rasta braids in their hair and all the other things that come along with these stereotypes I believe, is doing us a disservice. As you said earlier, the best form of representation for us, I believe, is having a medical doctor walk in and say, I consume cannabis daily. Wow, okay, and I should say a very successful medical doctor, or an attorney, or people that are respected in the community. And when I say the community, sure, maybe they're respected in the cannabis community too, but in the general masses, if you can have people, and that's why I think, initially, many of the celebrity brands, cannabis brands, I was like, oh my God, like, what do these people offer to the industry? Why do we need celebrities? They're just cashing in on, an opportunity. And over time, I actually started to come around and said, you know what? I still think they're cashing out on an opportunity, or cashing in on an opportunity, but they're getting the general public outside of cannabis consumers to say, like, what? Seth Rogen has a cannabis brand? What? Justin Bieber has a cannabis brand? I could go down the list, right? Even Ben from Ben and Jerry's, Ben's Best. Those things help us normalize and and break down those stereotypes. So I think they're important. But just to come back to what you said earlier, how do you represent tie-dyed wearers without wearing a tie-dyed shirt? Again, I think tie-dyed wearers, for lack of a better term, is just such a small segment of those who consume cannabis. And I think if we only focus on those and only represent them in a way that they look, in the way they act, that's really doing ourselves a disservice.
And let's not forget that you can wear a tie-dye shirt and not even smoke pot.
Exactly. Thank you for coming. I appreciate that.
Yeah, man. No, it's been a great conversation about marketing, dude, and I really appreciate you, listening to all my cockamamie theories and whatnot.
And just quickly, in my book, I have the 14 cannabis brand archetypes, right? And I go through them and I talk about who are cannabis consumers, what are they looking for, and how have these brands come out? And so now I've been in the cannabis industry for 12, almost 13 years. I've gone to almost every trade show. I haven't missed anything. I have a weekly show myself. But here's what I've noticed. There are 14, maybe 15 cannabis brand archetypes. And, those are cultivator brands, foodie brands, health and wellness brands, celebrity brands, gender-based brands, and I could keep going. But there are different types of brands that appeal to different types of cannabis consumers. And so it's important for us even more so, not to group everybody into a stoner or a tie-dyed category or what have you. There's so many different types of cannabis consumers, and they all deserve a place at the table.
You ever watch Half Baked?
Yes.
So, do you think any of those are, those types of potheads that they had in there, would be like good marketing demographics, like the old hippie stoner and the I'm always better when I'm high stoner, the MacGyver stoner?
Again, I think
I was just messing around, man. No,
and I'm sorry to interrupt, but maybe a great example would be weeds, and the mother selling cannabis, unbeknownst to everybody, because she doesn't look like a stoner, and so on and so forth. That might be a better example, because I think what's so appealing about that show, or what was so appealing about that show, is people can relate to her as a mother, as a protector, as a moneymaker, and then she just happens to sell weed. So I think that's the strength. I think that's the key. We need to relate to people outside of cannabis first, and then when they realize or understand that we consume cannabis, but we're just like them or their family members, that's where I think we build bridges.
That's the thing, man. It's everybody can consume cannabis. There really is, like, it's hard to find a group of people that doesn't have that, and you know what I mean? Like, yeah, the doctors consume, lawyers consume, everything, everybody.
And the other thing too, which I think again plays into the stoner stereotype, is everybody only thinks about smoking weed, right? There are so many form factors now, from once we get out of flower and concentrates and dabbing and all of that. Yeah, there you go. I mean, there's beverages, there's sublingual slips, there's edibles, there's transdermal patches, there's all these different form factors that allow people to consume and uptake, that just break all stoner stereotypes. And again, we need to let people know about these things and understand these things. I have a friend, she uses transdermal patches. She's 60, and everybody thinks it's a Nicorette patch or some sort of other medicinal patch. It's not. It's a cannabis patch. So people don't look at her as a stoner. People don't even think she consumes cannabis, yet she does every day.
Yeah. one last thing I want to talk to you about. We've been going at it. I've actually really enjoyed this conversation, man. I don't normally enjoy taking the reins, but this has been a good combo. The one last thing I want to talk to you about, and it's something that I wish Gary could weigh in on, but it's our classic argument about cannabis and marijuana. And and I think we both agree, if it's a piece of legislation, if it's a scientific journal, if it's written by somebody who speaks English and it's professional, it should be cannabis, 100%. But colloquial speaking, right? I really don't enjoy it when like, we are NORML. We're the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. And there was this one event where our executive director got up on stage and he said, "We're NORML. We're the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws." And there was this 50-year-old white guy in the back that screamed out, "It's cannabis!" Right? But no, it's not cannabis. We're NORML. We're the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. And I feel like there's like this, I realize that you're working on a project right now, and I don't want to hinder anything that you're doing on that project, but I do feel a little bit of racism when somebody tells somebody named Carlos not to say marijuana in colloquial speech.
Absolutely. I
And
totally. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
well, and I like, but I can understand wanting to keep everything formal and wanting to represent everything proper at all times. I just it, can you go into like how this word came about? Because I think where me and Gary's argument really kind of goes against each other is Gary thinks that the word marijuana was made up by Hearst, and I feel that it was a term used in Mexico for quite a long time. So I don't know, where do you stand? It's like the history of the word marijuana. Have you looked into it at all?
I have, and I'll share that with you in a moment. But the one thing we need to say up front is words are used by people as tools. Words have different meanings to different communities. Words, the context of which words are used and the intent in which words are used are very important. So that said, now let's just jump into it for a minute. So while I appreciate what Gary said about Hearst, it's really, the word was termed or taken and reappropriated as a negative term by Harry Anslinger, who was running basically what is the DEA today, post-prohibition. So there are a number of things that sort of take place. If you think about growing hemp actually was forced by all the colonists. Every farmer had to grow hemp. Why? Because there were ropes that were needed, there were sails that were needed, there were all sorts of other things that were needed and required as tools within the community back then. As time progressed, hemp went right up against paper pulp in terms of using it for newspapers, and that's where the Hearst Corporation, if you will, comes into play. So it was really important that paper pulp be used for newspapers at the time and not hemp, and that's why there was this bump up against paper versus hemp. And so at that point, it was really a land grab. It was a money grab. It was the timber companies like Weyerhaeuser, and it was the newspaper companies like Hearst that were really pushing for this. At the same time, prohibition for alcohol was coming to an end. What was then the DEA was looking for other things to start to control. Otherwise, that department would have fallen apart. And Harry Anslinger, who was the head of that department, by the way, was married to somebody from the Hearst family at the time. And they started to push for really paper being used in newspaper. That's what this is really all about, which then prevented hemp from being grown. And hemp then also got tied back in with marijuana, which was typically seen at that point, either Mexicans consuming it or Black Americans, primarily in the jazz community. So along with this land grab for paper over hemp, along with um, prejudice running rampant at the time, this was why marijuana was then termed. This was why reefer madness came out. This was what all the things that sort of came about from that, which the government pushed. And the government, pushed things like when Black men smoke marijuana, they rape white women, they mess with our communities, and all these other things. So what's really interesting is not too long ago, about a year ago, I had a show on Clubhouse. I still have a show on Clubhouse. There was an episode on Clubhouse where we spoke about cannabis versus marijuana. And what became really clear to me was the evolution of words, the context which words are used in, and the intent which they are used as well. And after going back and forth with a number of activists, we had Dale Sky Jones from Oaksterdam University. We had a whole bunch of other people talking and chiming in from around the world. And this woman in her 60s from Mexico gets on and says, "You people are crazy. We use marijuana all the time as a word, and we don't see any of the racial, components of what you're talking about. This is only in the US," which then brought us into like, wow, so this is really context. This is really intent.
Yeah.
This is really how words evolve and can be used against us when they were really words within our community. So words are not static, and it's really important to understand that. And I talk about that in my upcoming book, which is Cannabis versus Marijuana. And I touch upon adult use versus recreational. I talk about strains versus cultivars. Strains are viruses. Cultivars are plants, right? We totally use the wrong term relative to that. And so what I'd like to do is get people more on the same page, both within the community, so we're talking the same language, we're using the same words, and at the same time, when it's descheduled or rescheduled or federally legalized, whatever that might be, and other companies start creating other products, that we're all speaking the same language. So when scientists and botanists come in to look at the plant, to do research on the plant, to create medicines, for the masses, we're all talking about cultivars and not this little cannabis community that's really off on its own, in its own world, talking about strains when, damn it, it's just the wrong word. And so, those are the things that are really important. And I think cannabis versus marijuana is really, the crux of what it's at. So just to come back full circle, when I'm with a group of friends or when I'm skateboarding at the skateboard park, I use the colloquial terms. I'm part of that community. But when I'm not with that community, I'm really aware of how important the words that we use are. And so I'm mindful to choose the words that will appeal and change the minds of the people that are not in the community.
Very cool. But yeah, the history of the term marijuana, though, where does it come from? Is it like, do you know if it like originated in Mexico or?
I believe it's a Mexican term.
Okay, cool. So that means that I'm right and Gary's wrong.
Another thing too, there was a number of Latter-day Saints, Jehovah's Witnesses, who were going down to Mexico as well to convert, people to their religion, and they came back smoking cannabis as well, smoking marijuana as well, and again, that was frowned upon by the masses and by the government, and so in many ways, that consumption was brought back here, and again, they were even alienated for participating in smoking marijuana.
Of course. Well, good conversation, man. We actually just hit the hour mark. Yeah, I enjoy your insights on marketing. You taught me quite a bit. Hopefully, I'll be able to market normal and chill them a little bit better in the future. I think we're going to change the name to the National Organization for the Reform of Cannabis Laws.
Miracle.
Now, believe it or not, if Gary Stein was able to chime in right now, he would say that he actually asked normal leadership if they could do that, and they just kind of said no fucking way. So, David, last thing, man. I'm going to give you the main floor here. We'll go ahead. We'll put your website up and everything. Tell people one last time, who you are and how they can find you.
Yeah. Well, again, my name is David Paleschuck. I'm the author of the first book on cannabis branding called Branding Bud, The Commercialization of Cannabis. I'm working on a second book right now called Cannabis versus Marijuana, which really addresses many of the things that we've just touched upon: recreational versus adult use, descheduling versus rescheduling, legalization versus decriminalization, strains versus cultivar, entourage effect versus ensemble effect, all of the things that we talk about on a daily basis, or the words we use, and just defining them a little bit more and talking about why and when and how we should use the words, because as we said, words are important. Their intent is important. Their context is important. And outside of that, I work with cannabis companies and those companies that are outside of cannabis, interested in cannabis, on a daily basis at my firm, Branding Bud Consulting Group. And if you want to reach me, you can reach me at brandingbud.com. That's my website. Or hit me up directly at david@brandingbud.com. And that said, I really appreciate the hour we spent. I love the conversation, and I'm happy we spent it together.
Very, very cool. I appreciate you. I want to point out one fundamental difference between what you and Gary said in the beginning of the program from Gary's video. Gary made it a point to say responsible adult use, and I actually disagree with using the word responsible because it implies that cannabis could be used irresponsibly. How do you feel about that?
I agree. I think, adults, I agree. I think adults.
You should be on the show every single week. So when I argue with Gary, you back me up.
Well, look, to use what Gary said against him, and I hate to do this, but, he said the opposite of recreational is professional. So if you use recreational, you can flip it and go the other way.
I think the opposite of recreational is boring.
But to your point, responsible adult use implies that there's irresponsible adult use. If we leave it with adult use, generally speaking, we believe as a society that adults are responsible.
Hey, David, I just wanted to point out one thing here. This whole presentation, this whole podcast is brought to you by Suncoast Normal. Suncoast Normal is a membership organization. You can join at suncoastnormal.org. Guys like me, guys like Gary, guys like Kano, we don't get paid for this. So all proceeds go to the cannabis movement and bringing information that you saw on this show to you for free. This podcast is free, so you get this info for free. You didn't pay nothing to watch the show. You can find us on suncoastnormal.org. We got a lot of interesting things coming up, in the works. So when all of those things pop up, you can find that on suncoastnormal.org. That again is NORML. Don't put an A in there. And what else? I'm trying to see. I normally don't do this here. And yeah, you can listen to the rotation every Sunday morning. Starts at 11 every morning. Every Sunday morning. Excuse me. And David, again, thank you for the show. Very informative. Hopefully people can market their companies better. Hopefully activists can help break stigmas a little bit better because they listened to our show today. So I thank you just for putting in that little bit of work. Hopefully it helped out the movement a little bit. So thank you. Hats off to you.
I hope so.
And with that, bye.